Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. For one good reason, we are stuck. We are stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship. And unfortunately, the opposition, which the people of Zimbabwe had entrusted to implement the requisite democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections and restoring people's basic freedoms and rights, have sold out. The thing with MDC CCC is that they seem to live in their own world. They have absolutely no regard of the rules. Well, the real world works only when you stick to the rules. CCC are like a student who insists in answering the question he wanted to be asked and not the question he has been asked. So what was the question that MDC CCC have been asked? Simple. Implement the necessary democratic changes to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. They've had many golden opportunities to do so. They failed to do so. And it is really annoying the way they keep on pretending they have not heard the question and answering the question they want to be asked. Here is a video clip of the latest CCC.
Welcome, members of the press, to this press conference. My name is Mkwananzi. I'm the national spokesperson for the Citizens Coalition for Change. Zimbabwe faces a deepening political crisis characterized by narrowing democratic space, arrests, political persecution, and weaponization of the law. At the center of the crisis is the tragic failure of leadership and institutional and political illegitimacy, corruption, and moral decadence. In the advent of the SADC visit, it is our fervent hope that SADC will live up to its SIOM report and help Zimbabwe resolve its electoral dispute in order to forestall the legitimacy challenges that continue to hinder political progress and economic transformation in our country.
Well, he has got a point there. But when you look at the reality, it is not SADC that is at fault here. I think this must be said and emphasized. It is MDC itself. They are now talking of last year's elections and dismissing them as flawed. And yet, they are the ones who insisted in participating in those elections. Chamisa himself insisted that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. so that Zanu PF will not rig those elections. And yet when the results come, this is the first one to say, oh, the elections were rigged. Well, why did you say you had plugged the vote rigging loopholes when you know that was a lie? The thing with Chamisa and his friends is that they seem to think they can do whatever they like and there are no consequences for it. They can lie today and no one will notice. Here is a video clip when Chamisa was being interviewed on Hard Talk on that very question of saying one thing and then denying it and refusing to accept the consequences of his lies.
Ende patakasangana na Trump akatibvunza naye akomana mari yamuri kuda kuti nyika ifambe imari.
Serious questions were raised about your behaviour in Washington, D.C. You did see some senior people on Capitol Hill, some Congress people, but you also claimed that you'd seen Donald Trump. You claimed you had a conversation with him in which you said he asked you how much you needed to move the country forward. You told him $15 billion, and he said to you that he would provide the money if you won the election. That was not true, was it?
Sangana na Trump akatibvunza naye akomana mari yamuri kuda kuti nyika ifambe imari.
It was not true that you'd seen Donald Trump and that Donald Trump indicated to you that he would provide, if you won the election, $15 billion.
All those statements were said by other people, not what I said.
Akasangana na Trump akatibvunza naye akomana mari yamuri kuda kuti nyika ifambe imari.
Well, no, because there is a video which shows you at a rally in January back home in Zimbabwe saying that Donald Trump had pretty much promised you $15 billion. To be clear, because some people in Zimbabwe are still confused, you're now telling me you did not meet Donald Trump.
We did not.
This is the reality. Let's go back to 1999, when MDC was formed. The promise to the people of Zimbabwe was that they would deliver democratic change. We are now 24 years down the line. The question that must be asked is, what democratic changes have you delivered? The truth of the matter is, none. Zanu PF was able to blatantly rig last year's elections because not even one token meaningful reform was implemented in the 24 years, including the 2008 to 2018 GNU. After the debacle, the GNU debacle, MDC, CCC leaders have been participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that participating in that process will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've soldiered on, regardless. But they will not accept the consequences then. If you insist in participating, which is what Chamisa and company did last year, what did you want SADC to do? The only thing SADC could do is come up with a report saying, disregarding Chamisa's promise that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, what we found is that the process was flawed. and illegal. And we come back to CCC. They take, and on the one hand, they condemn the process and they want SADC to fix it. They've not even acknowledged that they were responsible for insisting in participating in those flawed elections. This video clip goes on to explain some of the things that CCC are asking SADC to do. I'll just fast forward it and we can listen to it.
It is common cause that the 23rd August 23 harmonized elections were fraudulently flawed and did not produce a legitimate and outright winner. This is acknowledged by all observer missions, including SADC. This means that the government currently in place in Zimbabwe is illegitimate and not properly constituted in terms of the laws of the country.
I'll just pause it there for a minute. So CCC are now saying the election process last year were flawed, and yet they participated. And they even conned their supporters to participate, telling them that they plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He also acknowledges that all the election observer teams condemned that election process as flawed. What is interesting here to note is that the CCC leaders who won in that election went on to take up their gravitran seats, even with the full knowledge that SADC and the AU and all the election observers had condemned that process as flawed. Here comes what I'm talking about here, where CCC are behaving like a child who think they can have their cake and eat it too. And they will complain and whine, make a big fuss if they can't do both. It's bad enough dealing with a 5-year-old who thinks he can have the cake and eat it too. But when an adult is doing it, I must admit, it really beggars belief. But that is the opposition quality, or rather lack of quality opposition that we have in Zimbabwe. Let's just listen to his arguments further.
It is a de facto government. This is further exacerbated by the unlawful recall of our parliamentary and local government representatives elected on the same disputed election.
So here we go. The recall of the CCC leaders who had taken up their gravitran seats, even after they'd been told that the election process was flawed. He is saying that should be reversed. SADC should fight for that. But we have already said that the election process is flawed. Those people should never have taken up their seats. The recall is neither here or there. If the process is flawed, and everybody who was elected in that process is illegitimate. But here we go. CCC want to say that their elected representative are legitimate. And they even want SADC to fight in their corner to get them reinstated.
This has delegitimized the current parliament. We insist on the reinstatement of the unlawfully recalled elected members and the removal of imposters who were imposed by Chabang and others in connivance with Zanu PF. The weaponization and capture of the judiciary and the disputed presidents of Mr. Mnangagwa means that Zimbabwe now suffers political and institutional illegitimacy.
We can go on. The arguments are just tedious. We have got an electoral process that was described, and rightly so, to be flawed and illegal. We cannot move from the results, because that is exactly what CCC are trying to argue here. That if you look at the results, i.e. in those areas where CCC won, the process is okay. Where they lost, the process is illegitimate. The process is flawed. And you do not look at the results then. And this issue of fighting, asking SADC, as much as SADC Election Observer Team report condemned the election as flawed and illegal, SADC has met and discussed it and accepted that report. And they also decided to do nothing about it. And one of the obvious reasons why they decided to do nothing about it would be the fact that the opposition participated in those flawed elections, knowing fully well that they're flawed. The other reason for it is that for some reason, millions of Zimbabweans participated in the flawed process. Why did they? We cannot keep on doing the wrong thing and somehow expect that SADC should fix it. We have got to take responsibility for what has happened here. And I think the SADC report emphasizes the weakness in our political system. We have got a flawed electoral process. In 2018, the European Union had a 246-member election monitoring observer team, and they produced a detailed report and condemned those elections as flawed and came up with 23 reform recommendations. Not even one of those reforms were implemented. Chamisa knew it. His friends knew it, and they still went ahead and participated in last year's elections. And those elections were condemned as flawed. And the European Union could just have dusted the 2018 election report and changed the date to 2023 because the same flaws were there. The point here is we should concentrate on implementing the democratic reforms. This is the homework that MDC and CCC leaders have been given. If you can't get Zanu PF to implement the democratic reforms, you should stop participating in those flawed elections, only to perpetuate the dictatorship. They did have the opportunity to implement the reforms, particularly GNU. They failed to do so. Now the best solution would be to insist that the reforms are implemented and you do not participate. I believe if CCC had not participated in last year's elections, even more so, if the 2 million of their followers had not participated in those flawed elections, SADC would have had the opportunity to deny Zanu PF political legitimacy. We are now preparing for the 2028 elections. We should be concentrating on making sure that either the reforms are implemented or we do not participate in the flawed elections. At the present moment, as things stand, I think our friend Mkwananzi and his CCC friends are just marking time. They want to appear to their constituency as relevant. And so they will keep on pushing SADC to do things that even SADC cannot do anymore. They cannot revisit a decision they made last year to reverse it. They decided to do nothing about denying Zanu PF political legitimacy. They're not going to reverse that. No amount of whining on the part of Chamisa and company is going to change that. I think the people of Zimbabwe should be smart enough to realize that CCC are taking the people of Zimbabwe for a ride. I've come to the conclusion that CCC will never, ever implement any meaningful democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. They will want to make a big song and dance about how they've come up with strategies of winning rigged elections, only for them to admit soon after the elections that the elections were rigged. We can't keep on playing that song over and over again. We should stop participating in flawed elections and leave SADC. Let's see what SADC will do. And I believe at the present moment, 2028, we have got a good chance that SADC will not allow Zanu PF to get away with it. If we denounce the election process without reforms. I'll just end playing a video clip of SADC's chairperson of the SADC Observer team, Dr. Nevers Mumba, and the advice he is giving to the people of Zimbabwe on what to do since last year's elections.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, you know. But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, you know, there's a comparison, you know, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report, and then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, they're coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of the elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election, and they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that...
I think that advice could not be any more clearer. We should be fighting to make sure that we have got a level playing field come 2028. Yes, Zanu PF would not want to implement any democratic reforms. Zanu PF will never reform itself out of office. That is a fundamental truth that most people would accept. The problem here is what we do about it. The simple answer is, if the playing field is not level, do not participate in those flawed elections. Because if you do participate, you only give Zanu PF legitimacy. We've done this over and over again. Why do we keep repeating it? In the case of the opposition, we keep repeating it because they know that by participating, they get some of those few gravy train seats. That is what they want. But with the ordinary citizen, we get absolutely nothing. All we are doing here is perpetuating the dictatorship and our own suffering. The opposition would want us to believe they're fighting in our corner. They are not. And I think the people of Zimbabwe should wake up to that reality. I can rest assure you that as much as Chamisa is on a sabbatical right now, he is coming back. And he's coming back making the same outrageous promises that he's going to win the next elections without reforms. And when the results are out, he'll be making the same outrageous claims that the elections were rigged. Meanwhile, the damage is done. Zanu PF is back in office. And this has been happening for the last 24 years. Even somebody who has not been following this, you've got to ask yourself, what is it exactly the opposition was supposed to do in 24 years, which they failed to do in 24 years? If they were supposed to implement reforms. Why have they failed to implement reforms in 24 years? The truth is they have failed to implement any reforms because once they got into power, they decided to do nothing about the reforms, and ever since they've been participating in flawed elections for a share of the spoils of power. They've not been answering the question or addressing the problems that the people of Zimbabwe entrusted them to address. That is the problem here. We want an opposition that will implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Not an opposition that will participate in flawed elections, no matter how flawed, and then blame SADC or expect SADC to sort out the mess. The people of Zimbabwe have to grow up. This problem is not going to go away. I repeat, we need an opposition that will address the problem of reforms, implement reforms, and not always dodge the question and pretend they didn't understand the question. We've had Chamisa and company lying to us for so long. I think it's high time we become smart enough to realize that Chamisa and company will never, I repeat, they will never ever implement any meaningful reform to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Thank you very much and have a nice day.